A solar energy company with $1 billion promise, a founder who convinced retirees they were investing in a brighter future, and a truth that left thousands in the dark. This is the story of DC Solar, a clean energy dream that turned out to be one of the biggest Ponzi schemes in recent US history. In this video, you'll learn how it all happened, how it was hidden, and how so many people were left with nothing. If you thought scams only happened in crypto or Wall Street, think again. In 2008, a modest operation began in Benicia, California, under the leadership of Jeff and Paulette Carpoff. The couple introduced DC Solar as a cutting-edge clean energy company focused on a simple but compelling product: mobile solar generators. Mounted on trailers, these generators were marketed as versatile, sustainable power sources for concerts, construction sites, and disaster zones. To the public, it looked like the future had arrived, a fusion of green innovation and American entrepreneurship. The Carpoffs positioned themselves as pioneers of solar mobility, with a patriotic backstory and a seemingly urgent mission: bring solar to the masses. Investors were intrigued, and interest grew fast. DC Solar didn't just sell solar generators, it sold an opportunity. The pitch was clever. Rather than buying a product, investors could purchase the generators and lease them to third parties through DC Solar's network. Stadiums, emergency services, even music festivals were supposedly lining up to rent clean energy solutions. In return, investors were promised monthly lease payments that added up to solid, predictable returns. It sounded both noble and practical, helped grow the green economy while collecting a steady income. The model appeared passive, scalable, and supported by rising demand for renewable energy. On paper, it was a win-win. But it didn't stop at good intentions. DC Solar added a financial cherry on top: tax advantages. Thanks to federal tax credits for renewable energy investments, participants could deduct a significant portion of their investment, legally, right off their IRS bill. The company emphasized this blend of eco-consciousness and financial strategy as something rare: low risk, socially responsible, and government approved. The messaging was polished, almost too good: secure your future, support sustainability, and take advantage of tax law. For many, especially those near retirement age, it felt like the smart, modern alternative to Wall Street. And that's exactly who they went after. The marketing campaigns, seminars, and investor materials leaned heavily on themes of security, patriotism, and environmental legacy. DC Solar spoke directly to retirees, people who had worked their whole lives and wanted their savings to do something meaningful. The Carpoffs promised not only financial peace of mind, but also a chance to be part of a movement. Investing in solar wasn't just smart, it was noble. Thousands of Americans, particularly retirees and middle-class families, put in their life savings. They believed they were helping power a cleaner future and securing their own. What really pushed the illusion into overdrive was the flash. DC Solar poured millions into NASCAR sponsorships, splashing its logo across cars and racetracks nationwide. Jeff Carpoff, once a struggling mechanic, suddenly appeared in the VIP boxes, behind the wheel of a growing collection of luxury cars, hosting lavish parties. The high-profile branding gave the company legitimacy. If it was good enough for NASCAR, surely it was real. Investors saw their money tied to a rising cultural presence. But behind the glitz, the company's books told a different story, and that story was about to unravel. By 2015, DC Solar had exploded into a headline-grabbing success. The company claimed over $1 billion in assets, thanks to a flood of investor capital and rising interest in renewable energy. It was featured in clean tech publications, praised by local officials, and celebrated as a green energy leader. Its mobile solar units, supposedly in high demand, were said to be deployed at events, construction sites, and emergency relief zones across the country. From the outside, DC Solar looked like a textbook example of American innovation, a small business turned national powerhouse. But all that attention also brought something else: pressure to keep growing the illusion. The cracks began small. Some investors started asking to see their actual solar units. After all, they technically owned them. But many were told they were in use or not available for inspection. A few who pushed harder discovered something strange: trailers parked for months on DC Solar lots, collecting dust. No activity, no leasing. It didn't match the story, yet even these warnings felt easy to dismiss in the face of consistent payments. Investors were still receiving their returns on time, and the tax credits kept flowing. The logic was simple: if the check's clear, why worry? The structure of the scam gave it powerful cover. Because investors claimed federal tax credits for renewable energy purchases, the IRS focused more on documentation than deployment. DC Solar handed over paperwork, receipts, contracts, spreadsheets, and regulators saw what they expected. There was no early audit of actual equipment, no physical inventory count. Meanwhile, the Securities and Exchange Commission didn't act either, likely because of the appearance of stability and scale. It was a perfect storm, a green business, a growing market, satisfied investors, and no agency asking the right questions. The fraud had room to breathe. Inside the company, the truth was far less elegant. DC Solar had built only a fraction of the trailers it claimed. Thousands of supposed solar units simply didn't exist. The Carpoffs and their inner circle created entire fleets on paper, not in warehouses or factories. Employees were instructed to repaint and reshuffle the same trailers for photographs. Some units were stripped of parts just to make the numbers work. The rest were made up entirely, with fake serial numbers and ghost inventory systems. From the outside, DC Solar looked massive, but the empire was held together by imagination, spreadsheets, and bold lies. To keep the illusion alive, the company manufactured lease agreements with fake customers. These documents claimed that schools, municipalities, or event organizers were actively renting solar trailers, but most of the names were invented or never signed anything. With these fake contracts, DC Solar justified payouts to investors as if they were profits. In truth, those returns came from new investors buying in, textbook Ponzi style. The cash flow worked, until it didn't. The whole machine relied on constant recruitment. As long as more people invested, the checks went out. But the foundation wasn't solar, it was deception. At its core, DC Solar was a Ponzi scheme wrapped in solar panels. The operation depended on a steady influx of new investors whose money was used to pay fake lease returns to earlier ones. But what made it particularly deceptive was how well it disguised itself as a clean energy enterprise. The company sold solar trailer units, on paper, to investors, who were told those units would be leased out for income. But most of the leases were fabricated, and many of the units didn't exist. Tax credits were the hook. By claiming to buy renewable energy equipment, investors qualified for hefty deductions. The Carpoffs submitted falsified documents to validate those claims. It wasn't just fraud. It was engineered to look like a tax-efficient, eco-friendly opportunity, giving it both moral cover and financial appeal. And for years, it worked. The money poured in, and Jeff and Paulette Carpoff spent it with zero restraint. Over $140 million vanished into a whirlwind of extravagance. They bought more than 150 luxury cars, everything from vintage Mustangs to Bentleys and Ferraris. They flew private, stayed in penthouses, and purchased dozens of properties across the country. The couple even hosted celebrity-studded parties, rubbing shoulders with athletes, entertainers, and political figures. Their spending wasn't just personal, it was strategic. The flash added credibility, masking the fraud behind a curtain of success. The wealth wasn't reinvested into the business. It wasn't improving solar technology. It was fueling an illusion that grew more unsustainable by the day. What made DC Solar's scam even more staggering was how deeply it reached into the financial system. Major institutions like Berkshire Hathaway invested heavily, drawn by the promise of renewable energy and government-backed tax incentives. These weren't naive individuals. They were veteran analysts and corporate advisors, but even they were misled. The paperwork appeared airtight, the tax benefits were real on paper, and the Carpoffs had surrounded themselves with experienced accountants and lawyers. Banks trusted the documentation, not realizing it was built on fiction. This wasn't just a failure of due diligence, it was a sobering reminder. In the right context, fraud can wear the mask of legitimacy even at billion-dollar scales. Still, doubt began creeping in. A handful of whistleblowers and employees noticed things weren't adding up. Some investors started pressing harder, demanding serial numbers, photos, or site visits to their leased trailers. But they were met with deflection, delays, excuses, even legal threats. Internal inconsistencies piled up. One executive noticed duplicate paperwork with identical generator IDs. Others saw that supposedly leased units hadn't moved in years. Word began to spread quietly. Maybe this wasn't what it seemed, but many stayed silent, unsure whether they were catching a mistake or something criminal. The longer the silence, the deeper the damage. It all came crashing down in December 2018. The FBI, alongside IRS agents, raided DC Solar's headquarters in Benicia and the Carpoffs' home. What they found confirmed every suspicion, and more. Agents seized computers filled with fabricated lease documents, accounting records, and a maze of internal communications laying out the scheme. They impounded dozens of luxury vehicles, froze bank accounts, and began tracking down assets across the country. Behind the walls of a green energy business, investigators uncovered one of the largest Ponzi schemes in American history. The era of smooth pitches and steady returns was over. The reckoning had begun. The day after the federal raid, DC Solar was effectively dead. Its offices were shuttered, employees were laid off, and operations froze overnight. What had once been presented as a thriving clean energy business collapsed in plain view. Investors, many of them retirees, were left stunned, trying to make sense of the loss. There were no more monthly payments, no explanations, no support. Most discovered they hadn't just lost an investment, they'd lost their entire savings. DC Solar filed for bankruptcy soon after, and the legal process began the slow, grinding task of untangling the wreckage. The illusion was over. All that remained was damage, financial, emotional, and widespread. The financial loss was devastating, but the emotional fallout cut even deeper. Many of the victims were older Americans, drawn in by promises of safety, patriotism, and a clean energy future. They weren't reckless gamblers. They were careful planners. Some had invested retirement accounts, others had refinanced homes. One couple in their 70s lost everything and had to move in with their children. A former teacher said she felt duped and discarded. For many, the betrayal wasn't just about money, it was about trust. They believed they were helping the planet and securing their future. Instead, they were used as fuel for someone else's greed. In 2020, the Department of Justice filed a sweeping set of charges against Jeff Carpoff and a dozen associates. Wire fraud, conspiracy, money laundering. Each charge told a different piece of the story: how fake lease agreements were created, how funds were diverted, how tax credits were abused. The paper trail was extensive, and the evidence, much of it seized in the raid, left little room for defense. Rather than face trial, Jeff Carpoff pled guilty, as did several key employees and business partners. The plea agreements confirmed what investigators had suspected all along. This was one of the most calculated and far-reaching investment frauds in recent American history. In 2021, sentencing began. Jeff Carpoff received 30 years in federal prison, a rare maximum for financial crimes. The judge called it a staggering fraud that preyed on good people with deliberate lies. His wife, Paulette, was sentenced to 11 years for her role in the conspiracy. Others involved received varying terms depending on their level of participation. It wasn't just the scope of the crime that led to such harsh penalties, it was the moral weight behind it. This wasn't a case of business gone wrong. It was a scheme, carefully built to mislead. The message from the court was clear. No amount of charisma or clean energy branding could excuse this kind of deception. The courts ordered more than $1 billion in restitution, but that didn't mean victims would be made whole. Most of the money was already spent on jets, cars, real estate, and luxury. Federal agents seized what they could: homes, vehicles, watches, and accounts. Auctions were held, and the proceeds were distributed to investors. But for many, it was pennies on the dollar. A Ferrari or private jet can be sold, but not at the price it was bought. Restitution became a symbolic effort as much as a practical one. It acknowledged the scale of harm, but also the limits of justice when trust and time have already been stolen. DC Solar thrived in a perfect storm of optimism and oversight failure. The idea, portable solar generators leasing out to public air, publicly traded, so you have a setup that rewarded trust over scrutiny. Regulators, investors, even large financial institutions gave DC Solar the benefit of the doubt. The company's green credentials and slick marketing masked glaring holes. It exploited the public's goodwill, the IRS's complexity, and a cultural eagerness to believe in clean tech heroes. According to federal prosecutors, the scale of deception was almost unprecedented for a renewable energy company. Financial analysts point out that the fraud's success hinged on clever paperwork, not technological innovation. Fake lease contracts, inflated valuations, and manufactured inventory allowed DC Solar to pass audits and lull investors. One fraud investigator described it as an elegant crime wrapped in solar panels. The tax credit system added fuel to the fire, giving the illusion of government endorsement. Everyone wanted a piece of the green boom, and no one, at least for a while, wanted to admit they might be funding a mirage. The fallout didn't end with the Carpoffs sentencing. DC Solar left a lasting scar on the renewable energy industry. Clean tech startups now face heightened skepticism. especially those relying on investor funds and tax incentives. The scandal also triggered calls for reform. Should the IRS more aggressively verify the physical existence of assets before granting renewable energy credits? Should third-party leasing arrangements be more tightly monitored? For thousands of investors, the damage was personal, but for the industry, it was structural. DC Solar didn't just steal money, it stole confidence at a time when the sector needed public trust the most. What makes the DC Solar case especially painful is that it corrupted something many people believed in: progress. Investing in clean energy feels good, it feels right, and when that emotional appeal is blended with a promise of safe, stable returns, it creates a dangerous mix. This wasn't a get-rich-quick scheme, it was a stay-safe and do-good scheme, the kind that gets past our defenses. But good causes don't make bad math disappear. This story is a cautionary tale. Even the most inspiring narratives can be used as camouflage. Hope can be powerful, but hope without skepticism is a recipe for betrayal. In the end, DC Solar wasn't just a business failure, it was a test of discernment. Investors were shown glossy brochures, patriotic branding, and clean energy credentials. But beneath that light was a shadow: forged paperwork, false promises, and $1 billion gone. The lesson isn't to stop trusting, it's to ask better questions. Due diligence isn't about paranoia, it's about self-respect, especially when money, identity, and values are all on the line. When something feels too aligned, too perfect, too emotionally satisfying, it deserves extra scrutiny because sunlight is free, but believing in a false sun can cost everything. They thought they were investing in the future. Instead, they funded a fantasy. Real sunlight doesn't need to be sold, but trust, once taken, doesn't come back so easily. If stories like this resonate with you, where money, trust, and belief collide, consider subscribing. We explore real cases that challenge how we think about success, risk, and responsibility. Like the video if it made you pause, and leave a comment. Have you ever believed in a financial opportunity that turned out to be something else? Do you think we're too quick to trust ideas that feel good, like green energy or freedom? And if you're interested in another story where hope met reality, check out our video on Herbalife, one of the most legally bulletproof financial pyramids still standing today.